everybody. Welcome. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out on kind of a cold, muggy night. Word has it we have a hard end time tonight because if you don't know, we get to have a holiday choir concert taking place in the auditorium tonight. Hope you'll treat yourself to going into the auditorium for a few minutes to hear just really some outstanding students and their amazing staff, our teachers who really set them up for success here with this holiday season. But before that, we want to take some time to welcome you to tonight's. Now, I think this is our 7th engagement night over the course of the past 2.5 years. It's my pleasure to introduce you to a number of people who are going to be helping present tonight. First of which, Brian Johnson in the back of the room. Brian is our Director of Student Services. I think Sarah Straka, our Director of Instruction, is maybe running around somewhere. And she saw such a great turnout, she went to go make more copies, which is fantastic. And then I see we have a couple of Board of Education members in the room tonight. Jessica Aragoni, good evening. I think I saw Carly Fisher, welcome to you, and I think we'll have a couple of other folks join us in progress here as well. I'd like to also take this opportunity to extend a note of gratitude to members of our district community team. They have been integral in the success of our efforts thus far, and I'd like to ask if I can embarrass them for a moment to stand so they can be recognized. Especially that which goes unnoticed. And then I also want to extend a note of gratitude to our partners from Nehemiah, the Center for Urban Leadership. Good evening to Dr. Karen Reese. And I hope I haven't missed any. Oh, how could I forget? My fellow colleagues, my administrators. If you're an administrator in our school district, won't you please stand to be recognized? Well, here's our agenda for this evening. Our intent for learning tonight is, among other things, to explain why the need for this type of a community discussion, to revisit some key framework ideas that have been collectively developed for the purposes of making decisions in our district. Really, the centerpiece to tonight's work is unveiling the guideline we plan to use in order to address incivility and discrimination within our schools. And then lastly, to engage you, the audience, into joining us in a few real-life scenarios. The scenarios we're going to share with you tonight are not make-believe. These are things that actually are happening in not only our schools, but in schools all around the country. And ask and invite you to tell us what you think about how to address those. Our goal really is to lift our community's collective efforts in supporting our young people and the staff who love them. So therefore, we have a couple of norms for tonight. For example, when I raise my hand tonight, what that means to you is I think we're going to try to want to bring everybody back together again for a community dialogue. And certainly, as you're working either in this group, the large group setting, or perhaps maybe working within your smaller groups, sharing out with others, and during a time whereby we'll have some Q&A, some reflective opportunities for you to respond, you'll see some things that we're asking of you. Chief among them is that top line. Always presume positive intent. This can sometimes be a dicey conversation to have, to be honest with you. And we have to assume that if someone says something that may not square with our beliefs, that they're coming at this from a heart that is supportive, a heart of gold. And so we want to presume positive intent. And then when you're working in small groups tonight, I'd ask that you please develop a captain. That's that last one there. Share out through your captain who will speak on your team's behalf. And when you're sharing in your groups, listen and learn with an open mindset. More and more I get older, I think that there's some power in listening more than speaking. And I think that there's lots to be learned by the collective wisdom of this team here who's assembled tonight. And lastly, if you aren't comfortable sharing what's in your heart, sharing your thoughts. Know that we want to hear from you still. All ideas are welcome. Doesn't mean they're all going to be implemented, but it means all ideas are welcome. And we're going to have a method for us to be able to do that tonight through completing a little bit of a worksheet. So within your groups, and we've got enough people in each group, I think we don't need to count off tonight, do we, Sarah, or you think we're good? We were talking about maybe mixing up the groups a little bit, but I think we're good here. I'd ask if you could please take a moment, if you don't know one another already, to at your table just introduce yourselves to each other, and then maybe ask a couple of these questions. What's your interest in this evening? What do you want to learn? And what do you want to contribute? So if you would, just give another moment or so for you to just stay connected with those people who are at your table. We'll come back together again.
Part of our district equity committee. We would like to share some of the things that we share with community members and get from other people's perspectives on the ideas that we have.
Katie Seibel, and I guess the interest is I have 4 kids at 3 different schools this year. So just curious to see how it's going to impact the city.
Jessica Aragoni, I'm on the school board. I have 3 children, one already graduated. I've heard reports from the equity committee, and we've done some work as a board on policies, and I'm just curious as to, community input so that we can make sure that we're in alignment. You still volunteer to run after? Right? I know. It is a big time. And I don't know if we should join another person.
Yeah.
There's only 3 over there. We can make that a big group. Or maybe we make it small. I don't know.
My voice, that shot.
Be there too. Be there. Be there. Seems like we'll be
Well, Sarah's going to be there.
So, yeah, I was saying, I don't know if about it.
I'm so sorry. Now I got it.
Oh yeah. No, we're good. They all kept going. Yeah. So made the right choice and still can be passed. I can see that. Yeah. I can see that. Nora had Mr. Nichols last year, and half of Mr. Nichols' class is in Miss Harlan, which was nice for Nora realizing that there's friends next door. Right. But I think it was good having it
I won't ask you questions.
I think it was Nora also good for Nora having one kiddo with the same.
Just another minute, please.
It was great, but I think it's new haircut, new things were assumed in a very good way. Yes. There was no explicit conversation. It was good.
Oh, it was great. It was great. They went 2-1. Beat Utah's team and Detroit's team, and then they lost to New Jersey. So, it does, yeah.
And if it's a 37 number, I answer when it's like, they know this is my person. Do that, right, good.
Well, thank you for sharing. I love the genuine warmth that I hear going on between each of the groups, because we do need to be working together to solve the needs of our kids who we're entrusted every day. A good place for us, I think, to start is really to take a half step back in order to make a couple of steps forward. I mentioned at the onset of our conversation tonight that this is one in a series of conversations that we've been having here in our school community over the course of the, probably 2.5, 3 years. And each of those items has been documented on our school district website. For your convenience, we thought we'd just share with you that you can simply go to mounthorebschools.org and you can have access to not only the board's work, the diversity staff committee that's been working together, their materials are there, as have other previous recordings of other commitments we've made to our community. And thank you, Brian Johnson. Bart Leibfried, by the way, has been kind enough to set up a video recorder so we can have this on our website in the future. But you're probably asking yourself, well, Steve, why are we here tonight? Gosh, we seem to be talking about this a great deal. Why are we here tonight? Well, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is not just something you check off and say, oh, well, we did it, on to the next. It really needs to be nurtured. You know that more than anyone. In my estimation, we need to continually shine the light on what can and should be done to achieve our community's vision. The other why. Well, I love the fact that our students, they call it like they see it, right? And at a recent forum that we held with our students back on November 21st, that was especially telling to us. We thought we were being proactive as school leaders by further engaging them in this topic. And frankly, some of our students reported really feeling let down by the district. Clearly, we are still needing to address overt and covert acts of aggression, both micro and macro. And it would have been too easy for us just to put up our hands and say, well, let's just say we tried and move on. To do that, in my opinion, only cheats our kids. And we would then be promoting those micro and macro aggressions if we just turned a blind eye. We cannot allow people to think, well, this too shall pass. This is something that is going to become embedded in the fabric of our school district and the fabric of our community, as evidenced by the turnout we have here tonight. The other why. Our young people demand that we be accountable. This means we must be transparent. And in a few minutes, we will attempt to honor that request by sharing the guidelines I referenced in my invitation to you to come tonight. You'll be looking that over. While we can never report how students will be disciplined in our schools based upon grievous acts of incivility, we can let you know what the menu of responses might be in the event that a student needs to be disciplined. And that's part of that document we'll be sharing with you. The other why, we may be tempted to conclude that this is only happening at the older levels. And if you think that's true, that's not. We definitely have issues, though we think we can coach and teach at a younger level a little bit more than those who might have those embedded discriminatory practices in their hearts at older levels. Why? Well, this is another why. Our Board of Education, I think, has bravely put their nickel down as to what they expect from their schools. And they've done so by creating what we call our anti-racism and equity statement. And your senior leadership team allowed that information to cascade into the work we do through our own commitments that we share with our community. And then the last why. Why? Because we need you all to help us to build that culture to which we aspire. Like everything, our schools cannot do it alone. And so at this time, I'm going to invite my friend and colleague, Brian Johnson, to come up here to the podium and take us to the next level. Good evening, Brian. Let's give Brian a warm welcome. You know Brian was a corner student in high school, and I here before, we'll stop before it's all over. We've cleared the table.
Nope, it won't happen. One of the great things that we did as part of our district equity committee is we formed committees to do specific work and focus on different areas. One of the things that we did in our group that I helped facilitate was our equitable decision-making framework. So this goes to subcommittee levels, this goes to teacher committees, as well as board committees. And so when we're looking at policies and practices, are these important components being considered? When we're looking at making decisions for curriculum or decisions for as easy as field trips to go on, are we considering some of these components? And so we'll kind of work through each one. You can see how they kind of fit. But the first one, and one of the conversations that we've started to have too in addition to this is, it's called our equitable decision-making framework, but in all reality, as Steve mentioned, is we want this work to be embedded. It doesn't need to be an equitable decision-making framework. It should end up just being our decision-making framework, right? These are just important decisions that we make every day to be proactive, and so we're not reacting to certain components at the end. So when we're making decisions, the first thing we ask is who's being impacted by the decision that's being made, and are they included or excluded? And so the one that I think closely aligns to this is when we're picking field trips for our students. And the main part of my job is also the director of student services, which means special education. And so are we picking field trips that allow all kids to access? So if we're doing a field trip to the woods, how do we include our kids with disabilities who are in wheelchairs or might have mobility concerns? And so looking at equitable practices and making sure that all kids are included, that's something up front that we can solve, right? Our communities of color, individuals with disabilities, gender, individuals who are LGBTQI+, and or individuals with different socioeconomic status, are they included in the decisions being made? Our second one is, what are the potential positive outcomes and what are the potential unintended consequences? And if there are any, how do we mitigate those? So too many times we look at some of our decisions and then we're like, oh shoot, after the fact. And so can we have some of those discussions up front to try to head those off? Our third component is, does this align with our district equity statement and our strategic plan? So is this all aligned to what we want to accomplish as a district? And does this decision include wording that's inclusive of all represented groups? And so in our policies and in our practices, do we use student first language? Do we use the student instead of specific pronouns? Can we just make it more general and open to make sure that all of our policies and our practices have language that represents everybody? As well as, how do we ensure that the same rigorous standards exist for academics, exist for all students, right? So every student is held to a high expectation. And is it sustainable? I think back to when pre-pandemic we had Youth Frontiers come in and do a program for our students, and it was kind of this incredible activity and moment, and as teachers were walking out, they said that was an incredible experience and you better keep doing it, right? So we can't just bring in one thing for one time and then let it walk away. How are we going to sustain it and keep it going within our system? So those are the decisions, and this was gone through the equity committee, it's gone through board committee, it was talked about through the board, and this is kind of now our decision-making framework as we move forward and make decisions throughout our district. So that's kind of that piece. And now we'll give it over to Sarah, who's going to really kind of start going into some of the documents.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to take about a 10-second pause to hand out distribute a handout that we have that we're going through. You see a version up on the screen, a very small version. We'll give you a closer version. Wait till they're all passed. So as Brian said, this document titled Responses to Negative Student Actions, Behaviors, and represents current policies, procedures, and where we want to go with those as well. This document actually came out of one of our school district equity committee meetings back in October, where the team came together with some scenarios provided by Nehemiah and really talked through how do we handle these types of offenses in our school district. We drafted some language based on that work, and then we brought it to our students, as Dr. Salerno said. Students gave us their insight on our work and how we respond. We drafted and revised a little more. We brought it to our principal team, our senior leadership team, and then we brought it back to our principal team for the final look at it. So what is this document? As I said, the title is Responses to Negative Student Actions, Behaviors, and Language. It's divided into two sections. We have the top section, which I'll talk about first, about impact, and then I'll talk about some of the interventions that we're going to be going through. So let's take a look at impact. What does that mean? So you probably have heard the phrase, intent versus impact. Impact is what we're focusing on in the school district. In a nutshell, when you think of intent refers to what you thought you were doing. But impact refers to how the action was perceived and received by others. It's the impact in which has to be addressed, as this is what causes the harm for individuals, for groups, and for a greater school community. So we think about impact. We want it to be as objective as possible and think about the types and levels. So when we move forward and think through a scenario, we will frame it in a level 1, level 2, or level 3 impact. Level 1, looking at that reach and civility. We have it on your sheet, we have it up here as well. Oh, no, I don't get that far yet. So when we think about reach and civility, maybe an elementary student took another student's homework and hid it in another desk, right? Not a lot of harm unless it happens repeatedly. One-time event, that would be a level 1. Level 2, an example of that could be a first-time fight between two students. Impact was between those two students, hopefully one and done. It hasn't grown, it hasn't affected the greater school community. If we think about level 3, that's pretty malicious. And when we talk about impact versus intent, we also have to maybe consider intent in this one. Think about that emotional harm. Has there been repeated offenses? Has there been past warnings, past interventions? So example of this could be harassment, maybe discriminatory or derogatory language, repeated language towards a student. There's probably other examples you can think of, maybe as when you were a student or if you have kids or you taught. You can probably place them in one of these 3 levels. So this is one framework, one guideline that we use as we think about how to handle student behaviors. The next section then talks about interventions. Responsive interventions. So when a student's negative behaviors or actions interfere with the learning of others, impact school safety, or align with discriminatory language or practices, the following measures, which we'll talk about, will be identified and used, and maybe multiple measures may be used. So the first one on your sheet looks at education. That's where we want to start with kids. This is why we're here, right? To educate kids. So really working with that offending student, educate them on the why. So a good example of this, I have the honor and privilege sometimes when our principals are out of the school district or home with kids or whatever, I get to be principal for the day. And a couple years ago, I was covering a school building, and 2 parents came in and wanted to talk about something that was happening on the bus. Their family practices the Sikh religion, and within that religion forbids the cutting of hair. Therefore, some practicing males tie their hair up in a bun and in a jura. What was happening was a younger male student, an elementary student. He was riding the school bus, and some older students were poking at him, pulling his hair, and those kinds of things. Parents came in not happy about that. Not only were they teasing the student, but it was messing with their faith, with their religion. So after talking to the parents, doing some learning on my end, because I didn't know any of this, so I was Googling, trying to learn. I met with Cody, our high school principal, and the two students, and we really just talked through, first, don't tease, but did you know that this is part of the student's religion? Did you know that this is part of their faith and you're offending that? The two kids are like, you see the light bulb, like, oh no. They didn't really realize what they were doing. So afterwards, well, I'll get to that part of the story in a little bit. So for them, it clicked, right? What they were doing, teasing on the bus, was something larger that they didn't understand. Now they know, now they can do better. That's how we look at that education piece. Restorative piece. So this is an example of another step in our interventions, our responses to negative behaviors. So you see probably the base word, restore. We try to restore those relationships that maybe have been broken or hurt. So it's an opportunity for students who have caused harm to come to those that they have offended, to talk about the behavior, take responsibility for their actions, learn and grow. It can be a formal restorative circle like you see here, where you have maybe an adult facilitator and the students, or it can be more informal. That's what I'll talk about next. So let's go back to my bus story with the two high school students and the elementary student. So the two high school students and I walk to the bus loop. They find that elementary kiddo and apologize. One of the students is like, hey man, I'm sorry, I didn't know your hair was part of your religion, my bad. Like, he knew he was wrong, he owned it. And the younger student was like, okay, just don't do it again, right? So that's what it took for hopefully to repair that relationship. So it can be simple, it can be straightforward, it can be pretty quick, or it could be more formal, depending on the offense and who's involved. A key thing here is sometimes we're going to call them the victim, or that person who is offended may not want to be part of the restorative circle, so they can have a representative come in for them. The third step in our interventions is more corrective. So you can probably see the stakes are getting a little higher here. Corrective, there's a natural consequence. Hopefully that consequence relates to the problem or action. So it could be school or community service, maybe a modified school schedule, maybe they lose passing time. They have to walk with a principal or a teacher from class to class because of something they did. A couple examples of this. Let's say there is some graffiti sprayed on a building and a student is caught. What do you think the natural consequence would be? Clean it off, okay? Let's say we're in this cafeteria and there's peas on the lunch menu, right? And they're flinging peas at their friends. What would be the natural consequence? Clean it up, right? They're here after school, they're here helping our custodial team. So those are more corrective. The consequence, the intervention matches what the action was. So our last one that maybe people go to right away. Sometimes when they think through interventions is punitive, that punishment piece. So that negative consequence is provided by an adult due to the negative actions. So it could be a loss of privilege. It could be detention, suspension, or expulsion, or pre-expulsion. This is like the last place we want to go, but we will and do go there when needed. So maybe a fight in the hallway, maybe there's snaps during the school day harassing another student. Like we're really starting to see the level of impact higher here. So you could have a loss of privilege, you could maybe do the co-curricular code of conduct, be suspended from games, events, those kinds of things. So more punitive in response. So again, we have, go back here, a document that outlines both the levels of impact and then our interventions. On the back side then, we have a guidelines or a matrix that we started to look at. Okay, we have this occurrence 1, 2, or 3 that's happened. What is the impact? We look at that, and then we start to look at that menu of interventions that we can provide the student. So what we're going to be doing now is Brian's going to be taking over, and he's going to provide a scenario, more of a universal scenario, and talk through as a school district what we would do with that scenario using these guidelines.
Yeah, and so we're going to I'll go through the first scenario, then Dr. Salerno is going to go through another more specific one, and then it'll be your chance to kind of talk, discuss. And then we'll do and then let you have the opportunity to talk, and then go through what you guys think we're missing, what we need to add, just kind of your overall opinion and thoughts about this whole document as an entirety, and how we can move forward from it. So this first example is a pretty easy scenario, right? Something that does happen. A student's upset over a poor grade on an assignment. Student A confronts the teacher during the class and uses inappropriate language. The teacher refers the student to the office. Something that happens throughout the school days. So the first kind of big overall thing, right, is that we confirm the facts. So the student gets sent to the office, we confirm the facts, we follow up with the teacher, we follow up with the other students maybe in the class, interview, see if there's any witnesses, and then we interview the student as a whole as well. After we interview the student, he automatically admits that, yeah, he said it, and admitted to the incident. So, additional information, these are middle school kids, it's a first occurrence. When we really look at it, building administrative are really going to look at it from the responsive intervention as restorative. So it's a level 1 impact. As the offense is typical of a student, it was set out of frustration. It did cause great harm. And it was, a breach of civility. So it wasn't malicious, very little damage done. And that was according to the student interview and as well as the teacher. And so the lead principal or other trainer would meet with this incident with a restorative lens. So ultimately what we would do is meet with the teacher and the student to unpack this experience as long as the teacher is ready to do so. We would contact the family and then we would document the incident in the canvas. And so as a teacher perspective, we would acknowledge the hurt feelings and the need for the teacher to see this as a learning opportunity. We'd encourage the student when ready to engage in that conversation. And then the conversation would focus on understanding the student's behavior, any antecedents, working with the student to acknowledge the poor choice of words, determine how the student can repair the relationship with the teacher, and then a check-in with the teacher and the student to confirm that they're on a positive trajectory. So kind of a simple kind of solution, kind of going into it, how we would handle it on a regular basis, using this document as kind of clear guidance and moving forward. So that's scenario kind of 1, the easy one. And then we'll have Dr. Salerno go into one that's a little bit more specific.
Take a moment to read this one. approaching this matter? How many groups of people need support as a result of this incident? I can think of 4. Maybe you can think of more. Obviously, the first one is the student who made the inappropriate comment. The second is the student who received the inappropriate comment. The third is the student who the comment was made about. And then the fourth is the bystanders who witnessed that comment. Am I missing somebody? Great one. I should have thought about that. Yeah, how do we engage the parents about this egregious act? Staff who are people of color, anyone, any staff member, not just people of color, but all staff. I'm going to focus on the 4, and certainly this demonstrates, I think, for you how the responding administrator really has a tough job on their hands. Because any one of those groups might feel aggrieved that the process was not handled well, or feel like something more should have been done. And that's why this document you have before you, in its form, is really designed to be transparent to our community, be transparent to the people who are impacted by this kind of behavior, without talking about the details of what might happen from a consequence perspective. Because under FERPA, the Federal Education Reporting Act, we cannot share that information with parents. We cannot share how a student was disciplined, unless, of course, it's a parent of the child who is the instigator, for want of a better word. So this is our attempt to put out to our community really what our actions will be. Let's take a first big leap in all of this. Let's just assume, for ease of this discussion, the fact pattern means that everyone agrees about what took place. By the way, that doesn't happen all the time. But just for giggles, let's plan on just saying, this is something that everybody agreed to, everybody owns their part of this. So then, let's talk about the words due process. When you hear that, it's kind of a legal term. What does due process mean, even? This is the audience participation portion of the event. Everybody gets input. Everyone's given their opportunity to say what they need to say. In fact, we must presume innocence, right? Before we assume that someone has done something inappropriately. We need to gather the facts, lay them out on the table, and discern whether or not we need to take action in accordance with this document. So through due process, we learned that the student, let's just talk about the student who made this disgusting comment. We look not only at what the student did this instance, but we also look at their file. Is this the first time? Is this the second time? All right, so the nature of their language, the things that they've done, are they similar? And then that helps us discern, based upon the document you have in front of you, whether or not we are looking at a first occurrence, a second occurrence, and so on. Now, depending upon whether, I kind of see this as a level 2, level 3. What's the difference between a level 2 and a level 3 in this situation? To me, it comes down to, has the student owned it? Have they been truthful? Because I think that gets us from the injurious to the malicious pretty darn fast. And if the student owns it and is cooperative and feels badly about what he or she said, well then, I think we could look at kind of a level 2 response. And so let's talk about education and restoration in approach like this. This person not only represents themselves, but they represent the school community. What if the student is a student athlete? They're out there wearing our sports jersey. Yet everyone knows, in a small school like this, 780 plus kids, it may seem large, but in reality it's pretty communal. People know what's going on. And if they see a student out there with the basketball jersey and they know that they had just called their classmate the N-word a couple of days earlier, that's not going to sit well. That's not going to sit well. Corrective, I think we work with the family in order to individualize an experience for that student to help them understand really the gravity of their incivility. And then from that punitive perspective, the student would be suspended from school for a specified period of time. As the student is also in that co-curricular experience, we also look to the student code of conduct, and oftentimes that requires that student to be off the team for a period of time. They'd still be able to practice and so on and so forth, but they would not be able to participate. I think pages 9 and 10 of the code of conduct, which by the way you can find on our district website, will give that information. In the interest of time, let's talk about student B in that scenario. Student B, he didn't say anything or she didn't say anything. They just listened. Does that make it better?
Well, ideally, you'd like student B to say to student A, you shouldn't talk this way.
We're all responsible for the culture of our schools, right? And student B, we would have hoped, would have had the gumption to stand forward and say, listen, this is not right. That's not acceptable. Cool your heels. And walk away. I think it sends a message. You're exactly right. We aren't judged, whether rightly or wrongly, by the company we keep. And if we encircle ourselves with people who have the mindset such as student A has in this instance, we can expect that this student also will need to have some conversation with parents. Corrective, perhaps educationally related. Again, a file review would be appropriate to determine whether or not they've been a bystander. I always felt like when I was a high school principal, whenever there was a fight in school, the kids who were involved in the fight, yeah, they needed consequences. But what really made me sick to my stomach, quite frankly, was watching the kids who were on the outskirts of the fight, egging people on. It was like free entertainment for them. And that always made me hurt. Let's talk about the affected student. And by the way, affected and effective student. Affected from the emotional, from the heart, from the feelings, and the affected. That student who was spoken about, I don't know if he or she was in the room when this comment was made. But again, we're in a small enough school community that this stuff travels. And quite frankly, as it should. Because if you're going to say things like that, you need to be held accountable. But nonetheless, this person needs to be supported as well. I don't know that I have the corner on the market as to all the answers as to how to help that student out. I really don't. But I do know that I want to hear from that student about what they see as a possible resolution to this matter. I'm not looking for a pound of flesh, but I'm looking to hold people accountable for their inappropriate behaviors. And every situation will be different. The fact pattern will be different. But we owe it to the student to hear what he or she has to say about this matter. And dare I say, it's not just this one and done. It should be an ongoing conversation with this person. Check in after a week. Check in with the parents to learn what's happening at home. How's the student responding? Students internalize, you don't need me to tell you this. Students internalize that kind of discriminatory behavior, and it carries and manifests itself in ways weeks, even perhaps months down the road. I can still remember being called Salerno butter cookies when I was in second grade, and I'm 52 years old. Okay, so some of you have probably, guys have ever eaten Salerno butter cookies? They're delicious. They're delicious, and you can get them down in Chicago. But I still remember that. I carry that with me. Okay, no doubt, someone who's heard something far more grievous is carrying that with them years and years later. And lastly, the fourth group that I mentioned, just for the sake of time, are the students who overheard this comment. These are the brave ones who come forward to say, this is not right. They have such a strong sense of judgment. They want to be warriors for what they aspire to see our culture for. And I mean warriors in the most positive sense. Thanks for Facebooking. I hope you're Facebooking this live for people, because we've also got it on recorded. We're going to have that live for everybody as soon as tomorrow. We want our students to be using their voices. We want them to come forward and tell us what's going on in our schools. It can't just be the school principal who's responsible for being the culture keeper. It needs to be each and every single one of us. And we need to be clear with them, though, that their input in terms of how things are handled are limited. Because, again, we can't share the nature of how we've handled students' behaviors. So I'm going to ask you to turn into your groups. Oh, please, yes.
Can I ask a question
Of
about
course.
statement? I just want, I think you need better understanding in order to engage in the conversation that's coming.
Yes.
So when you say that you can't reveal the disciplinary action of students, it feels hard to understand because if you expel a student, students know that that student is no longer in the school for a period of time. So whether you're revealing it explicitly or not, they know. Number two, if you have a restorative justice practice where you're inviting the students to come together, then they're participating in that outcome, which also means that they know what the actual action is. So I need help understanding what this means that you can't.
Yeah, thank you. So what's the extent to which you can share? A lot of kids, if you know this, they're brighter than all. Yeah, they can deduce who's not in the room anymore, right? And so that's okay as long as I'm not the one saying, hey everybody, Steve's got expelled. I can't say that. But the kids can figure it out. And no doubt, sometimes the students themselves share this information freely. And that's fine. It's not, I can't control that, nor do I want to. But I can't say that. Your administrators can't say, hey everybody, because this student did X, Y, and Z, they're going to be placed on suspension for a number of days. Right? To your other thoughtful point, when they're in these kinds of restorative circles, maybe those students might glean or learn how a student might be disciplined, but the purpose of the restorative circle is not to talk about the punishment with the individuals who are involved, but it's to rebuild the relationship, if it's even rebuildable. Restorative circles should not occur if one of the parties is not interested in participating, because otherwise we re-traumatize the students who are involved, right? And so we need to be very thoughtful about that. Can a student deduce? They sure can, but it won't come from us. What a great question, thank you. How about others? Well then, how about we engage you and ask you to take a moment within your groups to reflect on two questions for us. And Sarah is sending around a little document. The first question is, what did we miss in this? And then, what else do you want to tell us? And Dr. Karen Reese is here with us. Karen, were you going to set this part up for us? All right. Everyone, this is Dr. Karen Reese from Nehemiah, the Center for Urban Leadership. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. First, I just want to apologize for dressing a little more casual than I would for an event like this. I took a nice little slide down the stairs on my way here, and then I was wearing my gym shoes after that. So, but thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Dr. Salerno, Brian, and Sarah for setting this up so nicely. We have had a good couple of years here working with the equity team at Horeb, and been able to be involved with the students as well to some extent through a couple of events. And so this is a really important conversation that we're having. And just a couple of things to point out before you go into your discussions. I want to point out that even in the simple scenario, one of the things that Brian said was the first step is to confirm the facts. So just to make sure those steps are the same here. And if the student decides to deny that they said a swear to the teacher, then that's similar to one of the students in scenario 2 denying that it happened, right? Even though other students are saying it. The other thing to consider here is the conversation with intent versus impact. So as was discussed, intent is important for determining the level of severity of what happened, but it is not important to determine whether or not something needs to happen, because the impact is what we're worried about here. Students were harmed, a student or students were harmed, and that needs to be dealt with. So sometimes we can get caught up, particularly when we're talking about race, or other issues about, well, do they mean it? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal to whoever was harmed by that. So I just want to make that part clear, that the intent is used to figure out the level of severity. So with that, and I just raised my hand because the first question that we really want you to consider is, did we get it right? Because instead of what we missed, maybe they're like, oh no, they nailed it, you know? That could be the answer. So I wanted to open the door for that option. And then just, you can follow along the questions on your sheet there. What did we miss in, so the example of the response that Dr. Salerno shared with you, what did they get right? What did they miss? And then of course, what other questions do you have? What other information do you need to know? You can zoom out and consider the document, the matrix in front of you. Is there anything there that was misapplied or that you think needs to go back to the drawing board? We really want to know how you feel about how this situation, this hypothetical situation, which by the way happens very often in the school district, how do you feel about how it's handled in this hypothetical situation? So for that, we would love for you to have a discussion. You can feel free to move at your tables if you want to face each other or whatever's most comfortable for you. And if you could have one person in your group, as was mentioned earlier, just sort of be the note taker when we're done discussing, we'll have a chance to hear back from you. If you prefer to just give written comments, you can also fill out that sheet and leave it with us at the end. We'd be more than happy to have those so that we can summarize those after the event is over. And then of course, you're always welcome to contact your presenters tonight if you have any other questions or you prefer to communicate your feedback that way. So with that, let's see. Let's give you till about 7:15 to talk in your groups, and then we'll reconvene and see what you think. Any questions?
One spokesperson for each group?
Yes, one spokesperson for each group. So like this table, you might want to split in two so you can talk nicely, however you want to do it. But yeah, one person can be ready to share. That'd be great. Yeah, that's the energy. Thank you all so much. All right, who would like to share first? And I am going to ask you to use the mic just so everyone can hear you. Yeah, that's right.
We're a small group, we'll be quick. I'll set the bar for quick. We talked about two things that I covered, fascinating. One, how really critically important it is for continued follow-up. Because we know, the corrective things in education doesn't always stick. And you might think that it's something, anyway, so that follow-up for both the instigator and the victim, as we call them. And number two, we just had a really lengthy conversation about all the legal ramifications that go on when a family doesn't think the school can do this. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely complicated. Who else would like to go next?
Our group talked a little bit more about the communication piece with families and how important that is for both the victim and the student, all the students that were impacted, for those families to be communicated with so they can support their students at home. We also talked about these guidelines to be shared with middle school and high school students up front, so they kind of know the rules of the game before they play, and how that will be communicated with those students in the education piece. And then we also talked about continuing at the high school level the Equity Day and opportunities to empower students to not sit in silence and to stand up and be advocates for those students that are being affected. That's it.
Thank you.
Our group, made up of some great community members here, we talked about like the work behind each of these instances, like the amount of time and effort taken to address the situation so it's handled correctly, to come up with solutions that support it never happening again. And just the questions that were brought up about, providing those consistent
ways to address the consistencies in how we educate and the wonders behind that. We talked about the need and note for families and home involvement as something that might be important to add to the document. There were some great questions here for students, for the student who, are they being asked if there is more going on beyond this incident? So even digging in just a little bit deeper to find patterns and to support that student beyond just that incident that they were noted to be impacted by. And then this group also talked about, outside of just the 4 walls and outside of the normal 8 to 4 day, are things being consistently, the expectations remaining consistent in those co-curriculars and other times that ensure that, again, this child wrapped around their whole day, whether that's, again, during their school day or extracurriculars, that the expectations are remaining the same. And then they just noted the thankfulness that the district is having these discussions and doing this important work.
Thanks. I love the suggestion back here about giving this out to students so they also know what's going on, and then also considering asking the affected student what else might be going on that we don't know about yet. Those are 2 very good suggestions.
Turns out if you write, you have to speak. Stay seated. We had a few things that we talked about. First of all, just gratitude from our group that this process is happening, that there is a voice in the community, that this sort of thing is occurring, so we're all pretty grateful for that. One of the things that was brought up was just the language of victims sometimes being called the offended party, which articulates a choice versus that student being harmed. And it's not printed here, but as we've been listening to people talk, we keep hearing that language and would like to be around the student being harmed, so that's an implication of choice in the student's reaction to whatever happens to us. Another one was in the example with the hair, just thinking about how important it is that we let the students do the talking about their own intent and not provide them examples, because it's very possible in that example that maybe that child was not being teased because religion wasn't behind it. There could be lots of other biases that exist behind what was happening in that scenario. So making sure that we as adults don't start to plant ideas and actually let those biases come out so we can know what we're working with when trying to figure out how to respond. If that makes sense. We also had some questions about the victim's role in determining the corrective, or just determining the response. So, for example, if the restorative circles aren't about the response that's going to happen, but a space for possible repair to happen, is there another space where a victim does get voice in saying how they've been harmed and what they would like to see the response be, and if so, where is that happening? We're kind of a heavy group here. 3 more. One, another question in terms of when responses are being determined, if the student's intent does matter, and Dr. Salerno's example, whether or not something was injurious or malicious, Dr. Salerno used the words that it was about the student's intent that might dictate how that gets categorized. But at the same time, the language is that impact is what should be guiding this. And so just wanting to make sure that impact is what guides this more than intent. Also, we just had a question why restorative wasn't, in the entire rubric, restorative is like in every single block except third occurrence on both impact level 1 and impact level 2. So we just had a question why those 2 particular instances do not have a restorative element. I told you I was just the one who was writing, but here we go. Okay, the last one. What role can a parent play when there's an incident? What power do they have to impact these guidelines, and more specifically, does a parent have veto power? If restorative, for example, in restorative circle, if the student who may have harmed another student, can that parent say, oh, I don't want my child participating in that? What role do they have in these responses? So those are our questions.
Yeah, thank you. Any answers from our staff about that?
Thank you so much. You're right. The role of the parent is critical to this entire process. As I said at the onset, we can't do this by ourselves. We really need everybody rolling up their sleeves and working shoulder to shoulder with us in order to get to the education of our kids. I would like to tell you that every time I visit with a parent, they will say to me, Steve, yep, my kid did this, and I even have parents who have it on videotape and they still refuse to accept the fact that their child has done something that's egregious and hurtful. I'm glad that doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, I'm very clear to say to that parent, this is where we're moving, and this is the standard we hold as a community about what is and is not acceptable. And what you choose to do in your home, I have no rights to get involved in, but what we're going to do here in our district, based upon the will of our community, this is the direction we're moving in. Are there appeals processes? Absolutely. That's the process of due process. That's the cornerstone of due process. And everybody needs to be heard. But just because you're heard doesn't mean you're right.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll also take up where restorative is missing and talk about that. Thank you for this. We have 5 minutes till our hard stop, although I would ask the groups that haven't spoken if you don't want to cut you off, but just, keep it brief. No, it's not you. And then if you can say just a couple minutes past 7:30, that'd be great. We understand you got to leave. Who would like to share this?
We have all the same grade I consulted. No, actually a lot of people already said what we also talked about. I think 2 additional pieces. Maybe was we talked a little bit about the who, like questioning who is ultimately responsible for implementing this. It feels like administrators have a lot on their plate, and that also administrators inherently have a power over versus power with student dynamic. And so really being thoughtful about how that restorative culture gets implemented by thinking about who the trained people are. Also thinking about the transparency of how these things are rolled out. Even there was some conversation about how some teachers will actually address student behavior in their classrooms, and sometimes it doesn't even get escalated to this level 1, 2, or 3. But we all live life through our own personal lenses, and so what might be egregious to one might not be a second thought to another. So how do we make sure that that is really clear and well defined? I was really struck in one of the examples by how there was kind of an implied trauma-informed lens to the response. But I think that what we need to keep considering is the intersection between trauma-informed care and this restorative justice process, because the root cause of the behavior is oftentimes pain. And so if we're just thinking about getting to restorative or corrective actions, it can actually increase shame, and then shame becomes internalized and then becomes projected onto students, ultimately causing more harm. So how are we actually thinking about the role of what's happening to these kids who are the perpetrators of harm that's causing them to act that way? Okay, and then the last thing was really around sustainability. I think that there are a lot of questions around this is not an easy task. I think that was addressed over there. This is a lot. In order for this to be really intentional and mindfully executed, it requires time and effort and attention and training, and it just is not really something that can be placed on top of what already busy staff are doing. It has to be something that is thoughtfully and monetarily supported.
Absolutely, thank you.
our group really identified just the importance of parental involvement in all of these situations. So if there's ability to, I think, list that somewhere, I think that would be wonderful. Also the variability of data, so just making sure that our responses, we're not having bias within those responses. So just kind of implementing some type of system, check and review to make sure that we are really following the intervention guidelines to fidelity. Also, as far as just that universal instruction for students, making sure that we have that follow-up plan, the universal expectations similar to what Rachel Johnson stated, for students to be aware of how these incidents are going to be responded to, and for our bystanders to be able to give them the power within those responses as well. And we did have, there was some discussion within the boundaries outside the school versus inside the school, so definitely looking into that school law piece of what is within our boundaries and what is not, I think would be a great follow-up for the community as well.
Yeah, thank you all so much. These were really, really helpful discussion points. And you know, the matrix in front of you are things that the district has already been using to determine outcomes, but you know, has been tweaked a little bit, and we provided some input about specifically dealing with issues related to race. We like equity overall, but at Nehemiah we do focus specifically on the race piece. And one thing that we hear often, and not just in Mount Horeb, this is everywhere, from families of color, is they don't feel like anything is done. They're not feeling the impact of, you know, any restorative nature, correction of harm. And so something like this, as Dr. Salerno mentioned, while we can't say exactly what form of discipline was done and to whom, we say here's how we're applying discipline across the board, or you know, response across the board, that things that are happening. And so when we have something like that in place, not only does it help staff and administrators be able to give a fair response, a more fair response across the board, but it also helps parents and students know that you know exactly what is happening. So it's not there isn't, or it's completely subjective, but it's there. So that's really helpful. We will definitely take this back to our conversations and our equity teams. And we meet pretty much monthly with the equity team. If you do have written comments that you'd like to leave, or if you're not going to use the note sheet that you wrote, please do just drop them on the table up here, and we'll use that to put together your notes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reese. Let's give Dr. Reese a round of applause. In closing, because I know we're running up against the start to the choir concert, please, let's keep this conversation going. I get a charge out of learning from you and working with you and knowing that we are collectively building this community culture, the community standard of what's happening. And in that spirit, if there's something that you'd like to share that you just didn't feel comfortable tonight sharing, that's okay. Give me a buzz. Give Sarah a call. Give Brian a call. Our job is to help support you. It's never a problem to call. And it's our job to empower our staff as opposed to usurp our staff. So our goal as a next step is also to share this with them and ask them what are the kinds of things you feel comfortable in addressing, because they're busy doing their outstanding work, teaching curriculum, building relationships with kids. Sometimes this can be a roadblock. And someone said it so thoughtfully before, well, hey, maybe I had an experience that might make me not ready to have that conversation or handle it. Well, that's why we're a team. That's why we're a family. We help each other out. So with that being said, I wish you and your families a wonderful, wonderful holiday break. Salerno butter cookies out.